The Fidelity Clause. Kevin learned long ago that betrayal rarely entered a room screaming. It slipped in quietly. It sat at your dinner table and smiled across candlelight. It climbed into bed beside you, kissed your cheek, and asked if you wanted coffee in the morning. By the time most people recognized betrayal, it had already unpacked its bags. Kevin Voss understood that better than most. At 38, he had built a life out of precision. He was a partner-track attorney at a private firm in Chicago, a man known for the kind of calm that unsettled weaker men. He wasn't loud. He wasn't emotional in public. He spoke in measured tones and listened longer than anyone expected him to. In depositions, people often mistook his stillness for passivity. Then they realized he had been letting them dig their own graves. His wife, Diane, used to say that Kevin had a face made of locked doors. At first she had loved that about him. It made him seem solid, safe, unshakable. Later, she came to hate it, because she never knew what he was thinking, never knew if he was hurt, never knew if he was suspicious, never knew if he was already 10 steps ahead. They had been married 6 years. Long enough for the wedding photos to start yellowing in frames. Long enough for routines to harden into architecture. Long enough for lies to stop sounding like lies. The first time Kevin suspected Diane was cheating on him, she was laughing. Not at anything particularly funny. Just a little too brightly at a message on her phone while they sat in the living room after dinner. The screen glowed against her face. She turned it slightly away from him without seeming to. A tiny movement, practiced, reflexive. Most husbands would have ignored it. Kevin didn't, not because he was jealous, because he noticed patterns. And Diane had begun changing hers. Her showers got longer. Her phone lived face down. She started wearing perfume to work that she used to save for dinners out. Then there were the small absences inside the house. Her body there, her attention elsewhere. Smiling at nothing, drifting through conversations. A woman slowly relocating pieces of herself before making the move official. Kevin said nothing. That was his first advantage. His second was that Diane had always underestimated what silence meant. She thought silence meant ignorance. She would learn silence could also mean observation. 2 years before the wedding, Kevin had insisted on a prenuptial agreement. Diane had rolled her eyes at first. She was in love then, or very talented at appearing to be. She teased him for being clinical, called him paranoid, then finally signed it after one irritated argument and 2 glasses of wine. She had never read it carefully. Kevin knew because Kevin had watched her sign it. People did funny things when paperwork interrupted romance. They skimmed, they trusted, they assumed. Buried in the agreement was a fidelity clause one Kevin had added after watching his father lose nearly everything in a divorce built on fraud and performance. The clause was brutal in its simplicity. If either spouse committed adultery and the other could prove it, the violating party forfeited any claim to marital assets, support, and certain property distributions. Diane had laughed when she signed. Who even does this? People who don't like surprises, Kevin had said. She kissed him after, called him ridiculous. Said, "Well, lucky for you, I'm not planning on cheating." He remembered that line often, especially now, because 5 weeks before Diane ever mentioned Florida, Kevin already knew about Owen Mercer. Owen worked with Diane at a luxury branding firm downtown, mid-40s, broad-shouldered, gym cut, silver at the temples in a way that made him look expensive. He had the polished, predatory ease of men who had lived too long being told yes. Kevin knew his name before Diane ever said it out loud. He knew because one Thursday evening, Diane had left her phone charging in the kitchen while she showered upstairs. Kevin had not gone looking for it. He had only walked by when the screen lit up. "Can't stop thinking about Miami." That was the message. No name on the preview, just the words. Kevin stood still in the kitchen while the house hummed around him. Then another message arrived. "You'll tell him it's a girls' trip, right?" Kevin read both. Then the screen went dark. He didn't touch the phone, didn't open it, didn't need to. He went upstairs a minute later and found Diane in front of the mirror drying her hair. She smiled at him in the reflection. "You okay?" He smiled back. "Just tired." That night, he lay beside her in the dark and stared at the ceiling while she slept against his shoulder like a woman with nothing to hide. Sometime after midnight, Kevin made his decision. He would not confront her. Confrontation was for people who still wanted the truth. Kevin wanted evidence and consequences. He began the next morning. The investigator he hired was named Elias Rourke, a former homicide detective, with tired eyes and a face that looked permanently unimpressed by humanity. Kevin met him in a quiet office over a locksmith's shop on Wabash. Rourke listened without interrupting. No false sympathy, no moral speeches, just questions. Do you want to know if she's cheating? Rourke asked. Or do you want to build a case? Kevin folded his hands. A case. Rourke nodded once. That's cleaner. Kevin slid a copy of the prenuptial agreement across the desk. Rourke read the clause and let out a low breath through his nose. She signed this? She did. And forgot about it? Kevin looked at him. Most people forget the contracts they assume will never matter. Rourke almost smiled. For the next month, Kevin lived two lives. In one, he was a husband. He kissed Diane goodbye in the mornings, asked about her day, made reservations for dinner, touched the small of her back at parties. Let friends call them solid, stable, the couple who would make it. In the other life, he was building the end of his marriage piece by piece. Rourke documented meetings, garage footage, hotel receipts, photos from a restaurant in River North where Diane and Owen sat too close in a booth dark enough to protect them, but not from a lens pointed through rain-specked glass. Kevin received the reports in encrypted folders. He opened each one alone in his office after midnight. At first, there was anger, not the explosive kind, nothing dramatic. Kevin didn't throw things, didn't drink himself blind, didn't call her names in the privacy of his own mind. What he felt was colder, a progressive freezing. Each photo lowered the temperature inside him. By the second week, he had moved beyond disbelief. By the third, beyond grief. By the fourth, something more dangerous began to form. Clarity. Diane announced the trip on a Sunday. They were in the kitchen. Rain tapped softly against the windows. She leaned against the counter with studied casualness, swirling white wine in a glass. So, she said, the girls want to do a long weekend in Florida, Fort Lauderdale, maybe Miami for a night. Kevin looked up from the email on his laptop. Oh? Just to get away. When? Next Friday. She took a sip without meeting his eyes. He could see the preparation in her, the controlled breathing, the carefully neutral tone. She had rehearsed this. That almost amused him. Who's going? Nina, Brooke, Tessa, maybe Lauren. Kevin nodded slowly, as if weighing logistics. You should go. That caught her off guard. Really? Of course. She smiled then, relief softening her face. You don't mind? Kevin returned the smile. No, I think you deserve a break. Diane crossed the room and wrapped her arms around his neck. She smelled like jasmine and expensive shampoo and the beginning of a crime. You're amazing, she murmured. Kevin held her for exactly 2 seconds before placing a hand on her waist. Just send me the hotel info in case of emergencies. Of course, she said it too quickly. Kevin almost laughed. That week, Diane transformed. Not visibly enough for a stranger to notice, but enough for a husband who had already seen the evidence. She bought new dresses online, had her nails done in a pale coral shade, started going to bed later than usual, smiling at messages in the half-dark while pretending to read. On Wednesday, Kevin came home early and found her on the patio whispering into her phone. She turned when she heard the door. Her expression changed instantly. A tiny flicker. Fear first, then recovery. Hey, she said brightly. I was talking to Brooke. Kevin loosened his tie. How is Brooke? Diane blinked once. She's good. He nodded and walked past her into the kitchen, leaving just enough silence behind to make her wonder if he believed her. That was the beginning of her discomfort. Kevin understood something about guilt. It didn't need accusation to grow. Sometimes all it needed was a quiet room, and the suspicion that someone else might know. He started planting that suspicion carefully. Nothing obvious. A question held a second too long. A glance at her phone before looking away. One night at dinner, he said, Funny thing, I ran into your old friend Tessa's husband. Diane nearly dropped her fork. Oh? He said Tessa's been in Aspen this month. Diane froze, but only for a second. Well, maybe she changed her mind. I don't know who's going now. Kevin nodded, as if the subject bored him. That night she barely slept. He could feel it in the mattress. When Friday came, Kevin drove her to the airport himself. Chicago was iron gray and wet. Diane wore a fitted cream coat over travel clothes, too elegant for a casual girls' trip. She kept checking her phone with the brightness turned low. Kevin noticed every movement, logged every one. At the terminal drop-off lane, he stepped out and got her suitcase from the trunk. You sure you have everything? He asked. She smiled. Yes. He handed her the handle. Then, just before she turned away, he touched her wrist. Diane. She looked back. For a moment, he considered telling her. Not the affair. Not the evidence. Just enough to see what her face would do. Instead, he said, Be careful who you trust. Something in her expression changed. What? Kevin smiled faintly. Florida's full of sharks. She gave a nervous laugh and kissed him. Then she walked into the terminal without knowing his investigator was already inside. Miami greeted her with heat and salt and a sky so blue it looked artificial. Owen met her not at the hotel, but 2 blocks away at a private condo rented under a friend's name. He kissed her before she got fully through the door. For the first few hours, Diane felt almost drunk on escape. The deception, the distance, the sensation of having stepped outside her own life. She told herself Kevin was too controlled, too detached, too buried in work to ever really see her. Told herself she deserved passion, deserved intensity, deserved a man who looked at her like he might ruin himself. Owen was excellent at looking that way. He knew how to touch with confidence, how to make promises sound reckless and sincere at the same time. He told her she was wasted on her marriage. Told her Kevin was probably more in love with contracts than with her. Told her she was brave for choosing herself. Diane believed what she needed to believe. By the second night, she began taking pictures she shouldn't have taken. Not explicit ones, worse, intimate ones. Their feet tangled near the pool, Owen asleep shirtless in white hotel bedding, a reflection in a dark restaurant window that caught the 2 of them leaning together like a couple who had forgotten the world existed. She didn't send them to anyone. She saved them because they made the fantasy feel real. On the